Hi and welcome to week 3 of the Study School for Strategic Management of Sport. This week, in our first series of screencasts, we're going to be looking at business level strategy. So the first screencast that we have this week is just an introduction to what we're going to be looking at this week with business level strategy. So let's first remind ourselves of the strategic management process. So in the live lecture last week, we said that we had completed our assessment of the strategic position of the organisation. So we'd evaluated the environment, we'd looked at internal analysis and assessed strategic capability, and we were in a position then to be able to say, where are we now? So we'd answered the strategic question. In the live lecture 2, I introduced you to TOES analysis, which is the first step in considering strategic choices. So based on the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats that we have, what are the strategic choices available? Another way of thinking about strategic choices is what's called business level strategy. And business level strategy is very much about how to compete in a given business. So organisations ask themselves, in the business we are currently in, what is the best way for us to compete? What is our strategy for competing with other businesses so that we can be successful? Okay, so when we move to strategic choices, we're starting to ask, how are we going to get where we want to be? What's the best way? How should we compete? So this diagram starts over on the right hand side with an organisation asking itself, in order to meet our objectives or our purpose, there are two fundamental questions. One is, which business should we be in? And which business we should be in is corporate strategy. And corporate strategy is the subject of the second part of lectures for this week. The other question that we need to ask is, how should we compete? Okay, so how should we compete is really about how can we gain competitive advantage, because we are more likely to be successful if we have sustainable competitive advantage. And in week 3, we saw that the resource-based view of strategy talks about the importance of having strategically significant internal resources and competencies. So business level strategy is what we're talking about here. And business level strategy is where organisations ask themselves, how should we compete? How can we use the resources that we have and the competencies that we have developed? Or how can we gain resources and develop competencies that will give us competitive advantage? So this is really basically what business level strategy is about. So the aims of the session for this part of the lectures this week is that by the end of the screencasts and by the end of this lecture, you should have a good understanding of the meaning of business level strategy. What is it? I'm also going to talk to you about generic strategies or generic business level strategies as a basis for competitive advantage. And we're going to talk about Michael Porter again. Michael Porter is the person we talked about when we looked at industry analysis and Porter's 5 forces. Well, one of Michael Porter's other ideas is generic strategies for competitive advantage. And he says that organisations can either have an advantage which is based on cost, so keeping costs lower and being more efficient, or they can have an advantage which is based on differentiation, and a differentiation business level strategy is one where the organisation does everything it can to improve quality, to add features which allow it to charge a high price, a premium price, which customers will be willing to pay because of the quality and features of the product. Okay, so those are the generic strategies that we're going to talk about. And we're also going to start off the lecture this week by revisiting some concepts that we looked at in the lecture on internal analysis. If you remember, in internal analysis, we said that value chain analysis is one way of looking at the internal resources and competencies of an organisation. Well, in the lecture this week, we're going to look at how value chain can be used by organisations to help them decide to either pursue a low cost, a cost advantage business level strategy, or a differentiation business level strategy. So that's the end of this very short screencast in which I have introduced the scope and the purpose and the aims of today's session. Screencast 2, which you will look at soon, talks about the value chain as a way of managing generic strategy, business level strategy, and coordinating activities so that that strategy can be achieved.